Okay, we have a pretty based panel right now. This is Socialist Alternative, and also we have Shama Sawant, Seattle City Councilor. Welcome, welcome, and CJ is joining me as well.
Absolutely. Good to see everybody.
Hey.
Hey, hey.
Yes, yes, Eric, I have to tell you, or I have to tell all of you actually, every time someone from Socialist Alternative comes on, you guys are always the most requested guests. They're like, bring them back on. But welcome and thank you guys for joining. I want to start off with in reference to Socialist Alternative, and we'll start with you, Shama. Can you explain to people, for those who are not aware, what is Socialist Alternative?
The Socialist Alternative, in the most basic sense, is a nationwide organization of activists for social, economic, racial, and gender justice. And we are also affiliated with an international organization which has its sections in many different nations, including the United States. So we are the United States section of the International Socialist Alternative. We also have a Socialist Alternative in Canada. We have an organization in Mexico, Brazil, many different countries in Europe, and so on basically all continents. And we, as Socialist Alternative, we are involved, as you'll see in the discussion today, we are involved in many different ongoing struggles of the working class, whether it is Black Lives Matter or strikes of the working class, of union members. And what we bring to the struggle is not only our solidarity in action, but also our ideas. And our ideas are based in scientific understanding of the capitalist system, and also an analysis, a presentation of what future we should be fighting for. And we believe that future is a socialist society. And the analysis that we bring is not only about what the system is like and what we want to go towards, but also how we do that. So tactics and strategy is very much a fundamental component that determines success or defeat of various movements. And what we bring is a Marxist analysis to that kind of strategy and tactics.
Awesome. Well said. CJ, I have some questions here, but I want to make sure I get you in.
No, absolutely. I can let me go ahead and pivot to the second question. It kind of because I was curious about this question. What's the difference between Socialist Alternative and DSA? And I'm not curious because I don't know the difference, but I'm curious to hear what you have to say in that comparison question. Kashama.
Okay. Yes, I mean, DSA is a socialist organization. It's a democratic socialist organization, Democratic Socialists of America. And we are actually, I think all three of us are members, dual members of DSA and Socialist Alternative, which means that we are in solidarity with many of the goals and agenda of the members of Democratic Socialists of America. However, we believe that a broader socialist organization like the Democratic Socialists, although, maybe we should get into where the DSA has come so far, relative to, say, 2016. I think that deserves its own discussion because we have to also understand what works and doesn't work in this kind of organization. But leaving that aside for a moment, we believe that a broad organization like the DSA, which has within itself various schools of thought related to socialism in terms of what kind of accountability structure should we have for elected leaders? What kind of strategy should we bring to a picket line for a union struggle? What should the demands of the Black Lives Matter have been? And what would have been the strategy to fight back? What should what should the demands be of the leaders of social movements as well? So all of these various questions are very important and concrete questions. And the DSA as an organization is a broader structure that has many different ideas on many of these concrete questions. And within Socialist Alternative, of course, also we have extremely healthy and lively and constant debate and discussion on various ideas. But we are a different kind of organization in the sense that as Marxist revolutionaries, we have a much more finely tuned agreement on those political ideas within our organization. So we genuinely, if you're watching this and if you agree with the way we approach political questions, then I urge you to contact us and join Socialist Alternative. But if you don't feel like you are ready to have that level of agreement with us, but you agree with us in terms of fighting together, fighting in solidarity for the working class, then absolutely you should be joining one of the broader organizations, and then we should be fighting alongside each other. And we don't see at this moment an either or. We want broader organizations and an organization like Socialist Alternative both to develop, because without this organization like Socialist Alternative, I mean, we can get into this if you like, but all of history, whether it's American or international, shows that without a genuine and strong Marxist current within the labor movement, within social movements, we actually cannot win victories. For example, all the victories of the New Deal were on the basis of many, crucial general strike actions, including the Minneapolis strike in the 1930s. And that, for example, was very much led by Marxists, by Trotskyists. So you'll see that it's a decisive component of social and labor struggle. At the same time, we also need to be in solidarity with the mass of people who are fighting for the same goals.
Have you had a lot of pushback? And we can bring in the other two brothers into the question if you would like to also answer after Kashama. Have you had pushback about, what was your pushback? Because I think I've heard a little pushback about it. What was the pushback? And what we need to instill into people sort of a revolutionary discipline. And I feel like this strategy of joining the DSA is good. And I get the way that you're explaining it, but I see it as Marxists being in the room while this broader organization is talking about policy and strategy. We have Marxists in the room able to push Marx's viewpoints, strategies in this organization. So I don't look at it as sort of a co-optation, because that's what I've heard. Oh, Kashama joined DSA. I don't see it as that. I see it as a person going and sitting in a room and saying, hey, no, I'm going to be the voice that's pushing for these policies. I'm going to be the voice that's pushing even further than maybe some other under the broader tent of socialism with the DSA. So if you can address any part of that, Kashama, and then the other two brothers, and then I'll pass it back to you, Sabi.
Thank you so much for that question, CJ. I'd like to have Ryan and Eric respond to it, and I can, of course, join in.
How about you go first, man?
Go ahead.
I was just gonna pick one, but if you decide whoever wants to go first, go ahead.
How about I start? So I'm also a dual member, and hey, my name's Eric. I live in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I've been an SA member for a number of years now. And this definitely has been like just ruckus on social media, but all that is really based on genuine political disagreement. Like there are people in DSA that disagree with our call for a mass party of the working class, that think that we can actually go into the Democratic Party and not really even reform it, but just operate in it and hope they don't kick socialists out. And I think that people join DSA to achieve their political goals. It's a socialist organization. People should be going into socialist organizations, working class organizations, fighting for their ideas. For example, New York City DSA just had their convention, and 100 elected officials who are a member of DSA or endorsed by DSA signed a letter against the 1224 proposal, which would have brought some accountability of DSA socialists to the organization. And these elects said, no, we don't want to do that. We actually don't want to have that proposal. So I actually don't know the details of the debate. So I won't say, which side is right or wrong, but it's clear that, all sorts of people join DSA to fight for their political ideas. And that's what DSA should be. People should not join. It should not be like an organization people are afraid to do so. And people should be open and honest about it,
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Ryan?
just kind of answer the question about like, do we run into like walls of like our revolutionary ideas? Yeah, I mean, to piggyback off of what Eric said, absolutely. You have you have people who may identify as a socialist, but like their notion of socialism is kind of like a capitalism with like some control over it, like some workers kind of control over it, right? Whereas our analysis is that whenever you inject capitalism into the system, it's always going to do what is inherent to the system, which is going to be one that's going to be at the fault of working people. And so, yeah, I mean, I think what we don't have here versus like what we have in most OECD countries is multiple parties outside of the two capitalist systems, the two capitalist parties rather. And so like actually having a place where workers can come together and be able to debate these ideas. And, you know, we one, like that 1, 2, 3, 4 deal was a notion that DSA would become something like a proto party, you know, like it was like a party where we can have debates, where we could, and that's a welcome development from our perspective. We want, like, right now, politics for most people, the reason why most people don't get involved, particularly working people and poor people don't get involved, is they feel like that it's so disconnected, it's so distant from what their reality is. And so ultimately you have that saying, like the biggest way to get people to forego their power is to perceive that they never had any. And so that notion, what we would like is an alternative organization where you can come in and feel like your voice can be heard, and what you want to perceive and struggle for can be won over. And that's what we would like DSA to be pushed into. But yeah, obviously what Eric said is there are other people who have different notions, different ideas, different reasons for being in that, and you know, for example, Sharma takes home the average worker's wage, right? That's a demand that we think is a way of holding accountability over our elected officials. The Democratic Party is never going to do that, right? Like the Democratic Party is like, I mean, as we know, I think in Congress, they're richer than the Republicans in often cases. You know, so like there's no notion where that's going to actually happen. We need to build a party where we need to create accountability measures. And I think that's one, you know.
Is the Democrats, I just want to interject this and add this to your answer. Is the Democrats, is that subject a continuous contentious sort of thing that has to be addressed or is revisited? Because it seems like there's part like you described that's like there's a divide. There's like and I call this a class divide. And it seems like there's an acceptance of the vehicle or vessel of the Democratic Party is a suitable vessel for the working class people. And then there's people like you who are part of the DSA who says we don't see that as a suitable vehicle. That actually is what needs to be challenged also along with the red team. So it seems like, you know, policies, yeah, you know, you're debating that, but that particular point seems like the point that's never going to change to me. So I'm curious to how the relationship proceeds. Like, is that not a deal breaker for them? If you're saying, no, I'm not going to participate in electing, you know, you're a Democrat, you know, that's not something I'm interested in doing. Like, how does that conversation go? Or do you even have those conversations in your perspective area? And you can continue, you know, what you're saying.
If I understand what you're saying correctly, yeah, from Socialist Alternative perspective, the Democratic Party is not a vehicle for change for working people. If we look at Canada with the new Democratic Party, the NDP. When you look at the Labour Party, which came into I think the 20s and 30s in response to the Liberal and Tory parties, we saw in the creation of new parties, we see some of the largest advances for working people in history. And we think that that's one thing, not the only thing, obviously, but one major thing that working people in the U.S. have to create to actually start to make the material changes that can improve the lives of working people here. So yeah, in DSA, there's definitely a debate on, dirty break, clean break, from the Democratic Party, or people who just don't even have an interest in breaking from the Democratic Party at all. But for Socialist Alternative, there's a basic agreement that the Democratic Party is not the vehicle for change for working people.
That's right. This is a good question here. Now, Shama, I did ask you this before, but I want you to explain to people how this works as being a part of Socialist Alternative. So Rodrigo said Socialist Alternative should primary Pramila Jayapal to expose her as a corrupt fraud that she is, then use the funds raised for mutual aid. I mentioned this to you before, and you told me it's not your decision alone. Can you explain to people how someone becomes a candidate out of Socialist Alternative?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question, maybe even part of the fundamental discussion of what kind of party working people need. I really agree with Eric and Ryan, really emphasizing the question of the of forming a new party for the working class, because neither the Republicans nor the Democrats, regardless of what differences they have between them, is going to work for us. They've proven themselves as completely betraying of any working class interests and loyal, for the most part, to the interests of big business and the wealthy. So we do need a mass party of our own. And the way Socialist Alternative approaches these questions is a model for what we want to fight for in such a new party. I mean, it's not just a question any third party. I don't agree with people who say, oh, we need a third party. Or it matters what kind of party it is. I come from India, which has a multitude of parties, and not one of them serves the interests of the working class. So it does matter what kind of party we are fighting for. And so some of the principled approach that Socialist Alternative brings to these questions is, I think, a model for what we should do. And one of those is something that Eric and Ryan have already mentioned, which is the fact that our elected representatives, representatives who are elected as members of Socialist Alternative, we have an obligation to take home the average worker's wage and donate the rest, which in my case, as a city council salary, which is the second highest city council salary after Los Angeles, is $146,000. So I take home only the average worker's wage, and the rest after taxes is put into a solidarity fund, which Socialist Alternative members democratically decide where are we going to donate that. So it's not a charity fund, it's a struggle fund, if you want to think of it that way. So in other words, if you're a union that's going on strike, we will absolutely donate to your strike fund. We donated $20,000 to the Amazon labor union when they were fighting in New York City for their unionization struggle. And we've donated to many other both social and labor struggles. And outside of that, in terms of how this question even begins, how do we run candidates for office? We, first of all, just to emphasize, we're not an electoral machine like the Democratic Party, which primarily what it does is it elects candidates who are then loyal to big business for the most part. But then the rest of the time, that is what they do. They raise funds to run candidates, and then they raise funds to run candidates. This is what they do. It's a never-ending cycle. You don't see the Democratic Party actually investing its resources in actively building social and labor struggle. So for the most part, what we do is that latter thing, helping to build that struggle. And as part of that struggle, within a larger strategy of building the fight back of the working class, we then also think about these questions about, does it make sense to run a candidate in this context? So what I'm trying to explain is that running a candidate does not have life in itself. It is part of the overall strategy of fight back. And so just to give an concrete example of what we did in Seattle, we played a Socialist Alternative in many cities, played a very important role in the Occupy movement in the fall of 2011. And then coming out of that, remember it was Obama's re-election year. Everybody, all the activists were told it's all well and good. You spoke out. There's all this anger against inequality, the burden of the recession being placed on working people's shoulder, young people. But now all you can do is vote for Obama. So there was clearly a feeling of discontent, a feeling of disenchantment with that idea. And so we as Socialist Alternative sensed that there is an opening for us to show a different kind of campaign. So the birth of this election campaign came from that idea, not from me waking up one morning and thinking, oh, I want to run for office because I want to be self-important. That's not how it begins. In fact, there is no room for self-importance or careerism in working class politics. That is the death knell of the working class. So we have to, really fiercely push back against that and have a collective approach. And so what we did was agreed that, yes, this is a moment for us to run a candidate and show what working class politics looks like. Then we collectively decide where we should run. Does it make sense to run in Seattle or in another city? Because, a strategy and the tactics matter. You don't just run anywhere. You don't have a sledgehammerish approach. We have to have an effective approach to where we run. What program should we run on? What are the three main demands we will put forward as part of the campaign? That's part of the democratic discussion. And yes, indeed, who the candidate should be is very much part of a democratic decision. And that's the kind of party we should have, a party where the careerist or self-interest of the most prominent members are not the ones that are deciding the course of the party, but the needs of the working class that the party represents decide the course of the party and decide the actions of the elected representatives. And so it was through that process that we ran the campaign in 2013.
That's right. I just want to add, this is how you end up with good candidates and good politicians. You don't have people that say, I want to be Congresswoman. I want to be president. That's how you end up with like the careerist, right? So I think it's great that the organization decides like, who is the best person to do it, right? And that person may feel like, they may think like, well, I don't know if I want to even run for office, but that's the whole thing about having like a Marxist organization. I want to go ahead and bring in Rome as well. Hey, Rome.
Hey, how's everybody doing? I'm sorry, y'all. I got called into work, but I've been doing some work on the side, trying to get this grant going, and I'm still working on a GoFundMe for the library that we are building on the east side of Detroit. But I've been listening to the show. I love what I'm hearing, especially from people that's wanting to build parties, third parties. Now, if y'all was to follow me, you guys know that I'm the don't vote type of guy, right? I always remind you, don't vote. Just don't even do it. Not even locally. Get your shit together. You know what I'm saying? Type of deal, whatnot. But I love that people are actually building these parties, because I always remind you guys, we are going to need people that's political minded, with that political mindset, who will want to run the country, run certain offices, have certain powers and whatnot. And we're going to need people on the outside like us to actually make sure that they make it to the finish line. It's not, you know what I'm saying? We can't just fight for one thing. We got to fight for everything. And this is the way that we make it to the finish line altogether, is by making sure, the powers that will crush third parties. You see how they do the Green Party, and they have millions of dollars and generations of propaganda that they have been pushing, and they still get crushed by these capitalists. So if we was to actually go out and have a real third party like Socialist Alternative, then we got to really put everything behind them. Everything, get out here, canvas, and really push, and don't adopt the language of your oppressors. Don't adopt the language of these Republicans and these Democrats and talk about wins and talk about gains, because it's not about winning and losing and whatnot. We're just fighting here. We're going to keep fighting until we lose it all. But don't worry about winning, because, even if we was to spark a revolution right now, no matter how you see it, we won't see our generation won't see the benefits of that revolution anyway. So just keep pushing.
I just want to add really quick when we talk about the workers and unionizing, and we look at something like the Fight for 15. So Seattle, you guys were a part of the Fight for 15. We had a Fight for 15 here in Massachusetts too, or past years ago. When you look at like the workers, for example, the Amazon workers, what could be some of the danger, I think, when you have workers a part of that type of movement trying to unionize? Also, I guess I would say also allowing the Democratic Party to come in, if you know what I mean, because I feel like we've seen that happen, and I worry about unions being co-opted by the Democratic Party. I feel like it should just be focused on the worker and what the workers are fighting for. I want to get you guys' take on that. Go ahead, Eric.
We can start with one of the gentlemen.
Eric or Ryan?
I'll talk. I'll do it. I'll do it. I don't want to be super talkative, but can you do me a favor? Just rephrase the question real quick, because I know you're talking about the labor movement and unions, but I want to make sure that I'm not like just rambling.
What could be the danger of a unionizing effort allowing the Democratic Party to come in and kind of co-opt what they're fighting for?
I mean, I think it's just massive dangers because, like, at the end of the day, the Democratic Party is not a party of the working class. It's a corporate party, like the same bosses that you're fighting against are funding this political party. And I think we've seen it like with this whole fiasco. I mean, there's so many fiascos, but I'll focus on the biggest one, the PRO Act, right? That the AFL-CIO was like, oh, we're going to door knock for Biden, we're going to massively door knock for and we're going to get the PRO Act, because this really, frankly, silly idea that we can't have a revitalized labor movement until we pass the PRO Act. So go door knock for Biden, and then we pass the PRO Act, and then we can organize in the workplace. It's just totally backward. Like, that's not how it works. You organize in the workplace, you fight in the streets, and then you can actually get the legislation, the PRO Act, but that's not going to just like be a panacea. But they didn't get the PRO Act. They said, oh, we're going to pressure Biden, and they didn't do that. And they're still not doing that. They're door knocking for the Democrats again. And so if we don't have the PRO Act, and also a lot of these, we're seeing a lot of workers going to unionize, like to unionization, seeing like the union, as an important step to take in the workplace. But instead of the money going to like organize is going to canvassing for the Democrats.
Yep.
So it's like if a Democrat goes into your like labor struggle, most likely they're going to talk about the midterms. They're going to talk about canvassing. And like I think while like the labor movement, we should be skillful though. I think it's like at the same time you don't want to be like completely cut them off from like we don't want you to come to our events, et cetera, et cetera. I think like a lot of unions, particularly even unions like Amazon Labor Union, can have like have a skillful approach and like invite these politicians in, and have them say their thing, but we should politicize it that like we're pressuring them, like you can't just come here and tell us to canvass. No, you have to talk about what you're going to do to fight against the boss that's funding your party. And us as Marxist organization, and as a Marxist, ultimately they're not going to do that. They're going to say, no, we don't want to do that anymore. Because at the end of the day, they're there for the boss, not for the workers. And I think we want to create those situations, because in those situations when like the workers is like, why didn't this politician show up to the picking line? Why didn't this politician talk about demands? Why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do that? That's when you start to see real lessons. Not only the Democratic Party can't be trusted, but we actually need our own political party, that's based in the workplace, that's based in the unions, that's based in working class communities, because we can't just like depend on these people.
CJ?
Absolutely. I actually want to hear. I'm sorry. What's your name? The next gentleman.
Ryan.
Ryan. I'm sorry, Ryan. I actually want to. I'm curious to hear what Ryan has to say for the same question. Before I asked a different question. What say you, Ryan, about the same question that Eric was answering?
Just to kind of reiterate the question is like the problem with the the unions affiliated with the Democratic Party, I guess, right?
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, obviously my answer will echo what Eric's saying. Essentially, like at the core, you have what Eric says, like a party that has both capitalist interests, and then the unions are coming into that as well. And like if we look at that on a international scale, the creation of the Labour Party in the UK, we can see like the actual gains, like the national health system was built on that kind of that successful drive to building a third party outside of the two corporate parties. So when we talk about the need for Medicare for all in the U.S., when we talk about COLA, cost of living adjustment, which I mean is desperately needed when we're talking about inflation that's well above 8 and 9%, while our wages are like at 4 or 3% rise. All of this is based on the fact that money, time that is being ran into the Democratic Party is like being taken away from what needs to be happening, which is like there's an emphasis in raising up the discontent, particularly from the right, but there's no avenue, no like a voice for working people who are actually struggling. Nurses who are being turned around at the job because they're demanding that more people be on the ground because they're under staffed. There's no vocal way to push that power out and to put these struggles out into the open. I think working people would be more than willing, and not just people who already identify themselves on the left, but people who are in unions have the potential of being able to be swung to working struggles if they actually felt like they had a voice that was going to be pointing in the right direction. And that should be the role of labor unions, because where do we spend 40 hours, sometimes 50 hours of our waking day, working time, but at work? So like, oftentimes at work is where you have most of your experiences outside of the segregation. I'm in Chicago, fourth most segregated city in the United States. Where do you spend the most time with working class people of different racial backgrounds? At work. So what unions need to be drawing out is how do we bring our similarities together and fight to improve the lives so that schools on the north side of Chicago that might be 5 times better than schools in the west and south side of Chicago, but like not nearly as great as schools in 1% areas, can come together and be like, we need a fighting struggle to improve schools all over. And I think that's what that's kind of an issue, and a lot of union leadership plays into a like Democrat first, union second.
Yes.
And that really does play out into a very like, when those things bump heads, which they often do, they tend to be on the wrong side of where we need them to be. And ultimately, and I'll close out with this thought process, people put a blanket analysis over unions as the fault of that issue, whereas the reality is the union's leadership's affiliation to the Democratic Party that usually is the reason why little improvement has happened to the material conditions of working people.
I think Shama's going to add on to that real quick, CJ, and then
absolutely. Go ahead, Kashama.
Yeah, I thought this was a very important question, and just to add to what Eric and Ryan have already said, I think just in terms of the last point that Ryan was making, really the fact that the labor leadership, for the most part, today has been and for a long while has been tied to the Democratic Party, really is symptomatic of the overall degeneration that has happened of the labor movement over the last decades. since the Reagan era, basically. And it's a demonstration also of how why it is important to have an analysis that capital things don't actually change permanently for the better under capitalism. So, in other words, the history of the American labor movement is proud and militant, but it's a while ago that that happened. And then since then, what we've seen is the ability of the capitalist system, the ability of the wealthy and the elite to mold their system in such a way that they are able to co-opt vast sections of the leadership of the labor movement. And we've seen this in social movements throughout the ages as well. And so what happens when a whole section of the leadership becomes part of the elite in some shape or form, and they represent their interests. And as Ryan was saying, they put the interests of the Democratic Party establishment first and the union second. And in fact, there's a deeper story there as well, right? So the fact that they are supporting this party that has betrayed the interests of working people for so many decades, basically throughout its existence, does not exist by itself. It's a function of their overall approach to the working class, which is not actually doing everything they can to defend the working class, but really somehow seeing their job as managing the struggle that working people have, but mainly keeping the bosses happy. And above all else, trying to avoid any real conflict with the bosses. And so what we see there is that not only do they put the union second, they put the members last for the most part. I mean, I don't want to paint all labor leaders with a broad brush. I think there are many genuine people who are struggling to find a different way away from that and really have a fighting approach, which we believe in. However, I think it is fair to say that for the most part, this is what we have seen through the labor leadership. That's actually not only that they are tied at the hip to the democratic establishment, they also don't fight for working people in the way that they should be fighting. And so you're seeing that so many of the gains that were won in the past have been wrenched away from workers. I mean, just to give you one small example, very important, but one very small example in the large scheme of things, which is that in the 1950s, 60s, so on, the proportion of union membership that had cost of living increases written into their contracts was 50, 60, 70%. Now it's 20%. So consider the fact that the vast majority of American workers, especially younger workers, don't have a union, and the ones who do have a union, only a very small proportion of them have cost of living increases. And why are we talking about this? It's exactly what Ryan said. I mean, we are in the period of unprecedented inflation, which is eating away at the meager income that working people have. And in real terms, wages have fallen back to an alarming degree, to the point that most people are not able to make ends meet, and we're now staring at a very grim period ahead for workers, which is the recession. And we know from past experience, unless we fight back, the wealthy classes, the capitalists, they are going to put all the burden of the recession on us, on our shoulders. And so the question for the labor movement is not only breaking from the Democratic Party, which absolutely it is. And in fact, let's be clear, the project of a new party for the working class is a non-starter without the masses in the labor movement, the rank and file, taking a militant approach and taking charge of that, and not waiting for the leaders to do it, but really showing leadership ourselves at the rank and file and becoming a huge backbone of the working class party. It's not going to happen otherwise. But it's also at the same time, at this moment, it is also going to be true that unless we find a way to build rank and file militancy within the unions, workers are going to lose more and more ground. So that is why it's important that we have seen these many important glimmers of rank and file fight back. I'll close on one very important example. The UAW leadership internationally has been just thoroughly discredited. And then this is you can read this on the news. And what happened when the John Deere workers went on strike in the recent months? They in the previous contract, the UAW leadership had rottenly lost away the cost of living increases, that cost of living adjustment, COLA, in other words, that the workers had won in the past. And in this recent strike, the rank and file really took charge, put aside the leadership, and was able to win that back in the contract. I mean, this is a very significant victory, but we should not only just be celebrating the victories, but looking at how they won. So strategy and tactics are the bedrock of any movement. And so I really urge workers who are watching this to also understand that that is how they won. They won not by putting blind faith in their leaders in the union, but by understanding that they're going to have to fight for themselves, and they're going to have to build solidarity amongst themselves, and not allow sort of this proxy solidarity, but explain to their fellow rank and file that if you want to win something here, brother, sister, sibling, you got to be out front with us.
Let me just chime in here. That was absolutely there's so many things you said there that is perfect for this short video I want to play, and I want to zero in on when you said strategy and tactic is the bedrock, and also militancy. And I want to use those in the context of talking about the strategy of the progressive Democrat. This is why RBN, Sabby, Rome, I, Nick, JB, we so aggressively argue against using this strategy of using this decrepit apparatus of the Democratic Party as sort of the pseudo vehicle for working class struggle. It's not a suitable vehicle. So this little snippet of when you had an interview on bad faith, I want to just play it and then just kind of zero in on a part that you say, and you're making the same point. So let's listen, and then I'll kind of ask the question at the end.
There absolutely should be a progressive challenger from the left in a militant campaign. I absolutely don't think it should be from the Democratic Party. And I do want to address the specific names that you brought up. But before doing that, I want to say it's much more about the strategy, the political strategy that we as working people use to bring a real challenge to the Democratic and Republican candidates. And the starting point, the ABCs of that strategy are you don't run as a Democrat. Because look at what they did to Bernie Sanders. Every Tom, Dick, and Harry of progressive Democrats supported Bernie in 2020. They were, when I went to the Tacoma Dome to speak at Bernie's rally, they were all there with me. I know these people. They don't support Bernie's politics, but they were there because it was so easy. There was nothing at stake to get on the Bernie bandwagon at that time, and yet then go ahead and support Biden once Bernie was crushed, because we all knew that was going to happen. The Democratic Party elite were going to use some trick or another to get Bernie off the books. And then you got James Clyburn, you got South Carolina, and lo and behold, it happened. We didn't know exactly how it would happen, but we knew it would happen. So the first obligation we have as people on the left, if we are serious organizers, if we have any loyalty to the working class, is to first be crystal clear about that. Whether it makes you popular or not, be crystal clear. The Democratic Party is not the way to go. And I don't want to hear, these things that people come up with on the left where they'll say, well, it's the ballot line, it's a technicality. No, this is no technicality. This is, if you don't run as an independent, you are not taking on the fight that needs to be taken on, which is to present an independent fight back. And if you don't, Bernie was the strongest expression so far of the burning desires that working people have. And I have a lot of appreciation for Bernie, but look what happened. It went nowhere.
And to the point, something is scratching my ears there. To that point that you made there in the video, like, this is the reason why we advocate so hard against using the Democratic Party, is because the working class has been put through so much with this idea that the Democratic Party is going to do something. Like, it is like we having this crushing capitalism on us, and then we having these broken promises at the same time, all crashing down on us. Like, this cycle has to stop. And my what I say to this is, like, what is the difference in 20-30 years that you've been trying to get the same thing out of the Democratic Party than 20 or 30 years that you're putting and an independent party of the two parties. Like, I don't like, you're not getting, because you're claiming you're not going to get a result from the third party, but what's the difference in what you're getting? You're not getting anything. And the trade-off that the professional managerial class on the left that's willing to make, to trade off all these things for the people at the very bottom to get these meager gains, is so disheartening, I gotta say, for those some of those that are willing to do those things on the left. But could you speak to any part of that, Kashama? And then we'll also bring in Eric and Ryan. Any part of the video or any part that I said that you want to kind of chime in on or reflect on?
Yeah, I think one of the distinctions that might be useful to make is between, and I think you were alluding to this, CJ, between the very conscious and cynical practitioners of the Democratic Party strategy, which is, let's say the leaders of organization and big NGO organizations and other Democrats themselves, like maybe local Democrats themselves, as opposed to just ordinary people, working people who might be voting for the Democratic Party because they don't know what else to do. And in the absence of any alternative to the Republicans, especially a Republican Party that is increasingly representing far more reactionary, really far right, dangerous ideas. I think our responsibility as organizers on the left, as Marxists, has to be to understand that for the people who might be doing that because they haven't heard a different strategy, or they haven't heard different ideas, they haven't had access to it, or they think that that's the best they can do, we have to, of course, have friendly and patient understanding of why they're doing that, and help to educate them to understand that actually we do need a new party for the working class. Having said that, I think it is amply clear that increasingly more and more ordinary people, just American working people, are disenchanted with both parties and want something different. However, we are at a very dangerous point, and I don't think today's discussion can be complete if we don't bring this point into our conversation, which is the dangerous rise of the far right. And all of that, I think, it can be explained by the failures of the Democratic Party to represent any aspect of the working class agenda. I mean, if you look at the recent Harvard-Harris poll that came out just days ago, the two political figures with the most, broad approval are Trump and Pence. AOC has an approval rating of 29%. So the point here is that that it's not only that we want to be able to win victories for working people immediately, address the climate strategy, climate crisis. We're also seeing a dangerous rise of the far right, and really the only way to counter that is to build a strong and independent left. And as long as we allow the sort of the crashing of all hopes at the shores of the Democratic Party, we are going to see more and more of that. Trump is about to announce his presidency, and so for us, we have to inside the labor movement and inside social movements have somewhat tough conversations about what has been the result of this kind of approach. And I would just also add in this context the fact that the BLM movement, Black Lives Matter movement, the George Floyd movement, was not able to win victories commensurate with the scale of the movement. It's not being lost on ordinary people, on young people. They are thinking seriously about it. But who's going to provide the answers to why that happened? Who's going to provide the answers for the fact that even though we had these mass organizations like NARAL, pro-choice, now Planned Parenthood, whose one job was to protect abortion rights, and they miserably failed at that job, and how the Democratic Party was complicit in this and failing to codify abortion rights in the last 50 years. I apologize for my dogs. All of this requires a serious analysis, and I think in some ways it comes full circle to one of your original questions of why does Socialist Alternative exist? The truth is, unfortunately, we don't want it to be this way, but unfortunately, at this moment, Socialist Alternative is perhaps the only political organization that offers this analysis. And this analysis is crucial because BLM showed that going out on the streets is super crucial. And I think every member of Socialist Alternative was out on the streets with our fellow working people and Black community members at that time. But as important is the political analysis, the political ideas, because without that, we are lost.
I just want to chime in here for just a second and say, I realize that the progressive movement, it was mainly, the energy was mainly behind Bernie Sanders, right? 2 election cycles in a row. And then perhaps the squad, the first group of the squad that went in. But I feel like after the second time, 2020, when Bernie Sanders lost, there was nothing for us to go back to because the movement was all about a political campaign. There was no working, you know what I'm saying? It's like CJ and Rome, there was no working class. There was nothing that, like, there was no organizing,
and it was no
unions.
interest. There was no interest, it seemed like, in doing that either. I don't know how you mobilize millions of people that are willing to give you millions of dollars, and then just because President Obama comes and says, "Hey, buddy, it's time to have a seat," like you just okay, you drop out of the campaign, but why don't you continue to leverage that momentum, that power? That is just so disheartening and disappointing in that particular moment. But that's where, to me, I realized that the Democratic Party it's never going to be that. That's when I realized in my own mind that it's never going to be that, and we need to organize a different way. And I believe that RBN, an organization like Socialist Alternative is an organization that some of the things that your organization does, we want to model after doing that, because we're about to launch our own sort of chapter like sort of thing, like in our home city. So like Sabby's in Boston, so it'll be like an RBN in Boston, and I'm in Los Angeles, it'll be one here, and it's community outreach. It's helping to meet some of the material needs or the gaps in material needs in our communities, so that they can take a breath and be able to even listen about organizing and what's happening. That's the first step. You have to sort of give a life raft first, like, to people, so that they can even have the ability to listen with so much going on. I felt like somebody was going to chime in.
I just wanted to chime in and say, like, this goes back to the union type of deal, because you can't expect 2 corporations who's giving each other money to do anything for you, right? Because I know that it's just part of our vocabulary and whatnot, but I think we really should get it out of our system of calling the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, a party. We know it's a corporation. They only move like corporations, and they show us all the time. So I think I think that would help drive our message to the people more if we was to call them what they truly are, is a corporation. And when you see these politicians out here, like me and Bernie went to the catalog strike, but I pushed back on Bernie because I said, yeah, you want to hear for their clout, you know what I'm saying, get a little clout, this and that, because they lost their negotiation deal. They lost that bill, right? He didn't push.
Yeah. He
didn't use his power or anything. We got the man on our show multiple times to try to get people to fund, et cetera, et cetera. None of that happened with Bernie. He didn't even tweet him, at him on Twitter, right? But this is what we are going to have to do. We're going to have to just stick up for our people and make sure that our people unions are ran by, are ran by the people who want the best for the people, because these corporations, they get in and a lot of people see what they didn't have before and they take it and they look back and they forget about the people that they had before, right? Managerial class, right? Oh, well, I'm gonna fire you, I'm gonna demote you, whatever. That attitude. That's how they do us. They get in a better position and they knock us down. But I think What
I think you're speaking to the petty bourgeoisie class,
Yeah.
where they're like they're part of us, but they think they're part of the other class. Like they think the other class is really
Yeah.
like
You know,
with
like
them,
people
but
that
they don't understand that other class is going to squash them too when it comes down to it.
yep.
I get
People
it.
that live in gentrified neighborhoods but still think they think they're rich.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do want to make sure. I just want to make sure I do just shout this out really quick because so people know where to go. So this is Socialist Alternative's website, and I put the link in the chat. What's important to note, let me take this banner down for just a second. What's important to note is what they stand for. So always check and see what are the demands. So they have a long list of demands here. I'm not going to go through them. It's a lot of them, and I'm looking at the time, but a long list of demands here. A new political party for working people, fighting for the 99%, raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour, healthcare. It's Socialist Green New Deal. So fight racist oppression, a long list here, but definitely check out their website so you can see what Socialist Alternative is doing. And I just love this, like building a working class fight back.
I've never seen fight racism. Like I've seen people I've seen corporations try to use racism to, trying to try to get their little money and what, but I never saw it as a demand. I never saw it in their plans to actually do something about racism, because I do actually want to do something about racism if we can make it laws or anything, because I don't think the laws that we have against racism right now is strong enough. Of course, it won't be strong enough because it's a racist ass country, but we have work to do. And I'm glad that somebody is actually pushing back on this, because it's not only Black people that's feeling this. It's a lot of our people that's feeling this, from Middle Eastern, Asian, and fucking African. So it's gonna take a lot, but I love to see that. I'm about to go on that website actually.
Yeah, check it out, and I'll tell people too. I've met socialist alternative members all around. I met one from the New York chapter when I was at camp. I don't know if I told you that, CJ, in Rome, but when I went to Camp Dada, I met a SA member from New York, the New York chapter. But they're all over, and I usually see them wearing the Socialist Alternative T-shirt. So, but you guys are like, don't see.